Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Morning Coffee with Cameron. In today's video, we're going to be exploring some sound design techniques inside of UVI Falcon by request of Moky Larry. So about a month ago, Moky left a comment and said, "Can you please do more sound design tutorials from scratch? I suck." Now I'm gonna stop you right there and say, first off, don't ever be discouraged with your current sound design capabilities, because sound design is just hard. That's why it's a job. If sound design wasn't difficult, synthesizers and whatever wouldn't come with presets. You would just be able to pick it up and do whatever you wanted with it, which certainly isn't the case. Being good at sound design requires a pretty deep understanding of a lot of concepts and fundamental things, as well as just a lot of experience, because you constantly need to improve and learn new things. I myself am always learning new stuff, whether it's from mistakes, good or bad, or reading something new, or seeing a new tutorial, or whatever it is that happens. So it's never like you just wake up one day and know everything there is to know. It's just going to be a constant uphill climb. That being said, I would never want to discourage someone from getting into sound design, because I think there's a lot to be said for being able to design your own sounds from scratch, as well as just having a deeper understanding of how synthesizers and whatever works, because it just opens up a lot more creativity ultimately when you know how to approach something to do something new with it. Or you want to approach something and just have an idea of what you want to get out of it. You know, it's a lot easier and less frustrating to make music when you can crack open your session and just get to work. Now, while I would love to teach each and every one of you guys every single thing I know about sound design, it's simply beyond the scope of what I can provide on a YouTube channel, mostly due to limited time and resources, as well as just experience. I can't give you years of experience in designing your own sounds. It's just something you have to do for yourself. But it's never too late or too early to start learning sound design, and it's a lot of fun. It really is a just great time to be able to make weird bleeps, bloops, and blops. So Moky wanted me to do a video about keys, plucks, and bells inside of Falcon, as well as drums. Now I'm going to be saving drums for later, because I'm actually going to be doing a drum design video for the future Garage Mega series once things warm up and weather permits. So in today's video, we're going to be covering how to design plucks, bells, and key sounds inside of UVI Falcon. However, nothing I'm going to show you is exclusive to UVI Falcon, so if you don't own it, you can follow along in whatever you would like. The only things required for the sound design tips I'm going to show you today are a subtractive synthesizer and a basic 4-operator FM synthesizer. If you have a synth that also allows you to import samples, like using the noise oscillator in Serum or something like PhasePlant with a sampler oscillator, that would be great. Otherwise, you may need to combine a synth with a sampler to get some of the results I'm going to demonstrate today. One thing that I think is worth noting before we dive into this here today is I am not going to give you a bunch of formulas to design plucks and bells and keys. Instead, I think our time is better spent with me illustrating some fundamental concepts and ideas that you can then take and run with and turn into your own sound. So I'm not going to show you a bunch of presets that you copy and run off with. I want to show you how these things work and how to get into this whole designing these sounds in this realm so you can create your own unique sounds. So if you're looking for just a bunch of copy and paste these settings, you can go to another tutorial, because this is not that video. So with all of that out of the way, let's hop into the DAW and get started. All right, we're in the DAW, and this is a quick instrument I built. I just wanted to demonstrate this first, just to kind of show the idea of what we're going to be making today. Now, personally, I would lump keys, bells, and plucks into all of the same category, really. It's just kind of slight variations on the same instrument and concept. Now, let's break this down and think about the instruments at hand that we're talking about, a plucked thing, a key, or a bell. When we think of a piano or a Wurlitzer, for example, we press a key, out comes a sound. That sound decays in volume over time. That's the core, lowest level thing about plucks and bells and keys. So generally speaking, we're not going to have any sustain involved, but rather a very long decay period. The only time sustain is involved is typically in synthesized keys, sounds sometimes, but really that's not always the case. Another thing to keep in mind is how these sounds behave. In the instance of plucks and bells especially, there is a very distinct transient sound. There's like a clicky something that happens, so there's always that little bit of kind of bright something at the beginning, and there's two ways we can go about this: with filter movements, or by creating a transient by synthesis, or with a sample. So those are kind of all the key concepts we need to keep in mind is the instrument and sound we're after and what makes up that sound. This process of breaking down things into their fundamental parts not only is great for this video we're doing today, but this is what I apply to all of my sound design. If I'm making a kick drum, I think about a kick drum and what it is, what it does, and what it sounds like. So this applies for just about anything in life when it comes to wanting to do sound design. With all of that out of the way, let's get a fresh Falcon open and start designing a couple keys, plucks, and bells. So let's begin by designing one of the simpler key/bell/pluck sounds, which is just an analog style patch. To begin, all we need to do is go to our oscillators up here and grab an analog and plop that guy on in there. Now, if I play this right now, all we have is a sine wave that sustains indefinitely. So certainly not the most inspiring sound on earth, but at its core level, this is the starting point of the canvas that we need to start designing some keys and stuff. Like I talked about initially, if we think about a keyboard or a bell or pluck or whatever, it's not something that sustains forever. So first up, we're going to need to adjust our amplitude envelope. Let's crack that bad boy open. We can drop the sustain here to 0 and increase the decay to, let's say, 300 milliseconds or thereabouts. A little bit of release so we don't get any clicking, popping. And if we play this now, we should have a very basic pluck bell key sound. So now that we've got our core sound down, let's make this a bit more interesting. And I think the first thing we could do is establish a more definite transient. So how I would do this in this case is just by adding a very small pitch envelope to the oscillator. So within Falcon here, we can go to the oscillator section, right click on the pitch, go to add modulation, go to key group, and then use AHD or attack hold decay. Now that we've got this, we can click it and adjust a few things. Let's drop the hold and adjust the decay to maybe about 50 milliseconds or thereabouts. And now we need to adjust our modulation ratio. To do that, we'll go down here to modulation, click on the AHD, and we can increase this to, let's say, 7 semitones or thereabouts. And then we need to click and drag this to make it a bit more of an exponential curve. That way we just get kind of a nice clicky transient, and it's not like a sustained pitch bend, because that's not really what happens. Now that we've added a basic pitch envelope, let's give it another play and see what we've got. Cool, so now we're starting to get into pluck/bell territory, but we're still kind of in keys territory. Again, I would just lump all of these into more or less the same category. Let's drop this down a bit more to maybe 28 milliseconds or thereabouts, and that should give us a bit more clickiness. Cool, and now we've got our basic sound. Now that we've created this, let's make it a bit more inspired and interesting sounding. Let's change our waveform. Let's go to a triangle, which has a few more harmonics, and play this now. Bit more interesting, but a little bit boring right now. So let's start adding something else. Let's try a filter. Filtering is a very common way to create key sounds that are a bit more complex and interesting because we can enhance the transient by allowing a bit more brightness through and then closing it off over time. So within Falcon, let's go to our key group. We can add a filter. Let's just do the digital filter and we'll make it 12 dB per octave, started at around 1.5K. Maybe just a little bit of resonance, and then we can add a new modulator. We'll do an attack hold decay, and we can go into here and right click on the frequency, add modulation from the key group, and we will do attack hold decay 2. Let's name this as filter envelope, just so we can have an idea of what's going on. We'll double click and name this pitch envelope. All right, cool. So now if I play this, we have nothing really happening because we haven't adjusted our envelope. So in the filter envelope, let's drop our hold. Let's increase the decay to 200 milliseconds or whatever, drop this curve down a bit, and then we can go down here and adjust the ratio of the filter envelope or the amount, and something maybe about like that should be okay. So I'm at 0.24. Now that we've added this, this will open the filter up at the beginning and close it off over time, which should create a bit more of a distinctive transient or start to the sound. Let's give it a play and take a listen now. Cool, so that is basically your typical analog key patch, and we could do other things like changing the waveform again to maybe a saw. We could add some voices and make it stereo with a bit of detuning. We could adjust the filter cutoff point and the amount of modulation being applied. We could shorten the envelope of the filter to make it more clicky. Any number of things just to change up the sound a bit. That said, analog keys are not my favorite sound on earth. I think they're a bit flat and dull, but it is important to understand because this is kind of the most fundamental way to design these keys, plucks, bells types of things. It's all based around this basic idea. Now that we've done that, let's make things a bit more interesting by combining an oscillator with a sample. So let's go back to our sine here. Let's make this a single voice. We don't need it stereo, and right now we just have this. Cool, not that great, but it's a good starting point. Let's go into my samples here and grab a sample from my music box sample pack. This is actually free on my website as well if you want to download it. And then we need to unlink the oscillators and tune them together. So this sample is in E, so we need to adjust the tuning. Okay, I think that will work. So now we've got this sample combined with our analog oscillator, and we can maybe adjust the filter envelope to be a bit longer. Let's adjust our amplitude envelope to decay a bit longer. And the pitch envelope, we could maybe just shorten that down to be really short, but make it maybe a bit more extreme. And now we should have a much more interesting patch. So that is more of a basic key sound combined with a sample, which can yield some more interesting results. Now, the sample I'm using being a music box provides a few things. One, some more sonic interest because it's a more complex sound than just a simple sine wave. And two, it has a much more distinctive transient because it's an actual organic, really clicky transient. So this combines to create a sound that's much more harmonically rich and sonically interesting overall. Now, if you don't have any samples like that, or you intend to release this commercially, you can't use someone else's samples in your work, you can use the Pluck oscillator, which makes this a bit easier. So we can add a new oscillator here. Let's go to Pluck, and then we could just kind of flip through some different presets and tweak things from there. Cool, let's adjust this sound a little bit. And we can maybe change out the sample. There we go, that's slightly more interesting. So let's add a little bit of change to this filter envelope here, and maybe touch up the amplitude envelope. And now we have something that's in a similar vein, maybe not the exact same sound, but we get that more organic transient by using the Pluck oscillator, which provides some interesting physical modeling characteristics. So that is a basic overview on the simple version of these sounds, which is just using an analog oscillator and simple waveforms and maybe combine it with a sample to create some plucks, bells, and keys. Let's kick things up a notch though and get into FM. If you haven't seen it, I have a video covering FM synthesis that covers some of the basic concepts, but FM in general is a bit more tricky and is also a lot more useful for this kind of stuff because it's capable of creating much more harmonically rich timbres and complex sounds than just simple waveforms. So we've cracked open a fresh Falcon here. Let's go to our oscillators and grab an FM oscillator. Okie dokie. So here we have 4 different operators or oscillators. These can all be affected individually by tying something to the level to make them a true operator. Let's change our FM algorithm here. Let's go to the first one. So A is going out, A is being affected by B, which is being affected by C, which is being affected by D, and D feeds back into itself and then goes all the way back through again. To keep things simple, we're going to zero things out and start off with just outputting A. This is going to be just a sine wave. Cool, not that interesting. Let's drop our sustain down once again and open up the decay so that way we get the actual realistic-ish sound. Pretty cool stuff. Alrighty, let's start bringing in a little bit of B. Now, one tip about FM sound design is keep the ratios simple unless you have a specific reason to do otherwise. Otherwise, things get really out of tune and pretty crazy pretty fast. Another thing to keep in mind is you usually don't need as much FM as you think you do. Just little bits of simple ratios can go a long way. So let's snap B here. This will snap it to more fixed values. So we can just start off by increasing this to 2 and bringing in the level. Now let's bring in 3 here. Let's up this to maybe 4, or let's get a bit more interesting and do 4.5 and bring up the level. So we'll actually use B at 3 here. I think this is a good starting point. However, now we have the problem of this, which is not really a great sound. Instead, we need to control the amplitude of the modulators, and we're going to do that by assigning an envelope to them. So as I mentioned, this is not a true operator right now. It does not have an envelope tied to the output of this oscillator, which we need in order to turn it into an operator. So we'll go to Add Modulation, Key Group, and then we'll go to AHD, and we will call this Op2 level. Okay, scroll down, right click on 3 here, add modulation, key group, AHD, and we will call this Op3 level. Whoops, Op3 level. To keep things a bit more simple and see everything more all in one, we can go over to the tree view here. We'll go down to our layer, then into our key group, and then we see Op2 level, Op3 level. We can twirl these down and then access the ratio here. So let's go ahead and play this after we drop the hold down. Now we have decays, and let's see what we've got. So not anything great right now. Let's drop the decay of 2, and let's drop 3 down quite a bit. And maybe increase the ratio of 3, actually. Let's snap this. There we go. Now we're starting to get something a bit more clicky, and let's adjust the level of operator 2 and experiment with the value. Cool, I think I'm good at that. This is almost a woody, plucky bell key type of sound, but it's a bit more interesting. And then let's adjust our fine tune here. Maybe very, very slightly, like 8 cents and minus 4 cents. And this way we get a little bit of detuning and movement. So now that we've done that, let's give it a play and see what we've got. So this is certainly more interesting than what we can get out of a straight up analog oscillator. Once again, we can just add a filter to the key group and start tweaking it a bit. Let's grab the digital filter and we'll kind of just do the same thing. We'll add modulation from the key group and let's just do like an ADSR because this could maybe make things a bit more interesting. Cool, and down here, let's open this up and adjust the ratio. Cool, and we can go in and just tweak this sound a bit more. Let's go back and tweak our operators just a bit with the level here. And there we go. We could then, again, combine this with a sample or a Pluck oscillator or any number of things. Let's just do a quick Pluck oscillator here and grab some kind of preset. Let's do guitar and see what we get. That sounds pretty neat. It's maybe a bit brittle, but I think it's a, relatively good starting point for the sound. Beyond all of that, Falcon also offers an additive oscillator, which I would argue is typically better for keys and bells and plucks and stuff because it allows you to model some more complex things by detuning the individual harmonic partials. This is a lot of big boy words to say you can detune things to sound a bit more realistic. If we go into the additive oscillator here, we could start things off by maybe stretching this, adding a touch of dissonance. Not too much though, again, a little bit goes a long way. We could adjust the timbre and the even and odd harmonic makeup. We could add some comb filtering. We have a filter here. We can roll off some of this top stuff. Maybe add a second voice and detune it slightly. And then just mess with things. Till we get something that sounds nice. Cool, and I think that's a good starting point. Let's open up this filter a bit more, and we should have something that's kind of plucky and bright, but a bit more bell pluck-like because it's got a little bit of detuning in the additive oscillator. So a very pretty sparkly sound. The additive oscillator is pretty powerful and you can get a bit wacky with it, but like I said, just try and keep things relatively simple and you should be okay. Going back to my initial instrument I started off in this video with, I just wanted to walk through a couple effects ideas and common things, and this is really a broad subject because there's a lot of different things you can do and it's really your sound, so there are no hard rules. I just wanted to give you some ideas for plucks and bells as it's just kind of a handful of common effects. So within the effects here, I've added a dual delay and a spark verb, which is pretty much the classic key bell pluck effect, which is delay and reverb. As with most things, you can also add like some saturation or something. I guess for the sake of it, let's add in the old diode clipper here, just because diode clipper makes life better. And then in the edit tab here, I also tied an LFO over here to our gain, and this is this tremolo here. So this allows me to add some kind of warble and stuff. And then I tied some macros to all of this. So I just created an LFO here on the key group. Then I named it tremolo, and then I added a macro to it. So then I added another macro here to the tremolo speed, and then I've got another macro for the filter. So within the LFO, I just right-clicked on this and created a macro for frequency, and then another macro for depth. And then beyond that, to control the filter, I just went in here in the digital filter, right-clicked on frequency, and selected create a macro. This creates all these macros here, named them nice and neat. We could also add some controls for the effects. Let's do a macro for delay time. Let's add another macro for dry and wet of the delay. Let's add a macro for drive. So we'll go to add macro there. And then let's finally add one for, I guess, just the mix of the reverb. But you get the idea. You can add as many macros as you would like. So now we've got a bunch of macros on here, and I honestly forgot what these are for, but no worries. We can go into the tree and start locating these. So macro 4 here is tied to delay time. So we'll double click on macro 4 and we can do delay time. Macro 5 is tied to delay mix. Excellent. And macro 6 is going to drive. And that means macro 7 should be the reverb mix. Cool. Let's go down to the info screen, close this out, and now we've got a bunch of controls for our instrument. So we can get rid of all of this and start bringing in various effects, which makes our patch more flexible. Right now, not all that interesting. Let's add some drive. Let's add some tremolo. Let's open that filter. Add some delay. Make it relatively long. And add some reverb. Ta-da! You have a bunch of keys, bells, and plucks designed in Falcon. As I said, this is all kind of the same thing, so you just make variations on it based on the sound and what it sounds like. So, you know, a pluck will have some brighter, noisier stuff to it. A bell might be very tame, and keys could be just about anything. They could be very mellow and roadsy. They could be a bit more bright and digital with some FM. You could combine samples, you could combine FM with analog oscillators, you could do additive stuff, you can do just about anything. At the end of the day, like I said, my biggest tip when it comes to sound design is think of the sound you want to make and how it behaves, especially over time. That's really the most important part about all of it, is just what is it that I'm after? If you go into it with no end result in mind, you kind of just end up chasing your tail in circles all day and don't actually get anything done. So I hope this video was helpful in teaching you guys some basic concepts about designing some plucks and bells and keys and stuff, so hopefully you got something out of it, and big shout out again to Moky for the request. In the future, I plan to do some more Falcon sound design tutorials on a variety of topics, just because there aren't too many tutorials on Falcon, and there's a lot of other stuff that it's capable of that I feel, I guess, is worth demonstrating myself. So I think that does it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you guys again soon.